Welcome Stephen Brook, guest judge at the Royal Sydney Wine Show. What were the standout styles of wines you judged at the wine show this year?
Okay, you have to bear in mind that, like any judge, I only tasted 20% of the entries submitted.
Right.
So my impressions are perhaps not that accurate. For example, I didn't taste any Rieslings at all, so I can't say anything at all about Rieslings. But the standouts for me were Cabernets and Cabernet blends from 2008. The smallish flight of Pinots I had was pretty impressive. The Sauvignon Blancs and Sauvignon blends were better than I thought they were going to be. There's some really nice wines there. Semillons is the same every year, and I've done quite a lot of judging here. I mean, it tends to be the same people who enter the same wines at the same high standard, so they always do well, but they become a very familiar batch of wines in the Australian wine show. And of course Shirazes. I mean, Shirazes tend to dominate the shows, and I had a whole group of hunter Shirazes, many of which were absolutely lovely. There were quite a few golds. It wasn't a huge number of wines, but they were nearly all very high standards. So that was a standout for me.
Were there any surprises, would you say?
I was hoping for more from the Chardonnay.
Okay.
Again, I'm limited by the flights that I tasted. But people are talking about a revival of Chardonnay in Australia and a move from those fat, buttery, oaky styles to something that's more elegant, more lifted. And yes, there certainly were some wines like that. But I had some very good wines. I had very few wines that I thought were outstanding. But again, bear in mind, I'm not tasting everything.
If you were to come back in 10 years and judge at these awards, what commonalities or differences would you hope to see?
I hope there might be more diversity. I mean, there are other varieties in there. I mean, there's some Australian classics like Marsanne, which made its usual appearance, and lovely wines they were too. But I was in King Valley a few days ago, and there's a huge range of wines, Mediterranean varieties, Italian, also Spanish. And I'm not saying all those wines are good, but a lot of them are very good, and they're different. And they're, at their best, they're exciting, and it'd be nice to see more of those coming to the show. So it's not just 100 Chardonnays, 200 Shirazes, but get a little more variety there. I hope that will develop over the next few years.
And how would you say the Australian wine show system and judging system differs to those shows back in the UK?
Well, it doesn't differ from the one that I'm involved in, which is the Decanter World Wine Awards, which is the world's largest wine show, with over 10,000 entries last year. And it's very much modelled on the Australian show system, in that we taste in small groups, we discuss the wines, and we can call wines back if we want to discuss them further. And this is admirable. What I dislike are wine shows I've participated in other countries, where you fill in your score, and that's the end of the matter. Then the computer takes over and dishes out the medals. I think it's unfair on the wines, because we all miss wines. We all miss something that's really good, or we overrate something that isn't that good. Excuse me. So I think it's important sometimes to let wines have a second chance, especially if one judge is really enthusiastic, and the Australian system allows that. Perhaps the only problem for me with the Australian system is that there are an awful lot of wines to get through. Your palates can get pretty fatigued. It depends what you're doing, but if you're doing like 120 Shirazes one day, and by the end of the flights, your mouth is getting furred up with tannin, and if you criticise a wine for being too tannic, you don't know whether it's you or the wine.
Sure.
So I think that is a slight difficulty. But I mean, everybody here's a professional, so we do our best to cope with that.
And what would you say are the reactions to Australian wines back home at the moment?
I think it's going through a difficult patch. I'm not in the wine trade, I'm not really an expert on this, but I think the reputation of Australian wines has taken a bit of a hammering. And I think it's the consequence of supermarkets who dominate retailing, and no doubt some very large producers here that they're working with on a regular basis. I mean, Australia is notorious for providing us with supermarket bog-offs. And I don't need to explain that, do I? And the trouble is, it tends to be the cheapest and most boring wine. It may be technically well made, it may be perfectly drinkable, but it's not going to make anybody sit up and say, hey, this stuff in Australia is really good. Whereas, say, 20 years ago, you go into our high street chains such as Oddbins, which still exists, and there'll be a huge array of Australian wines and quirky wines as well. And the consumers, they love them. They're very approachable wines, they were reasonably priced, and all that seems to have changed a bit. We still find the good wines. You want the Henschkes, the Cullens, the boutique producers, the prestige producers. We can find those wines. We've got to search them out. They're not that easy to find. What else is there to say? Yes, well, the exchange rate. I think that's made an enormous difference. I mean, coming here from London, I find Sydney a much more expensive city than London by a long way. It's not your fault. It's just that the exchange rate is against us. It obviously makes your wines much more expensive in the UK than they would have been 2 or 3 years ago. The very large companies may be able to cope with that in various ways, cutting margins or squeezing supermarkets or whatever other tricks they get up to. But for a small producer, they just can't afford to give their wines away.
Would you say the Wine Australia A+ program is a step in the right direction?
I know about it, but I've had virtually no exposure to it, so I really don't want to say anything because I don't know much.
Who are our biggest New World competitors in the UK and why?
That's an interesting question. Clearly, New Zealand for white wines, though they've taken a hammering too, because prices have slipped a bit and people perceive the quality has slipped. I mean, not across the board, but there are some brands that people used to think were pretty good, but now they're not so sure about. California is not really a competitor because we get either really classy Napa and Cabernets, which are incredibly expensive, or we get really poor wines, mass market, sugared up wines. I hope you're not going to compete with those wines because they're not worth competing with. So I don't think California is a competitor. I think Chile and Argentina, yes, very good and reliable Sauvignons coming out of Chile, for example, some decent Chardonnays. Argentina more for red wines, for Cabernets and Malbecs. They're very good value, and you get a lot of bang for your buck. So I think people it's been slow. They've been very slow to appreciate those wines, but they're coming along now. And South Africa. South Africa is more hit and miss than Australia. Quality is more diverse. There are some very good wines there at a very good price. So I think that is and will remain competition.
As a wine writer and a contributing editor to Decanter magazine, what are your thoughts on social media and blogging? Do you see it as a positive for wine communications?
Well, it has to be. Anything that opens up the world of wine has to be a good thing. I'm old school. I mean, I write books and I write articles about wine. I mean, I have blogged for Decanter and I enjoy doing it. Whether anybody reads it, I have no idea. I don't tweet, but I've got nothing against it, except most of the tweets that people show me seem to be really banal. There's a limit to what you can say with 140 characters, other than sort of boosting your own ego, which is showing how clever you are. So, so I don't personally have much interest in tweeting, but I recognise its potential, especially as a marketing tool. I know that some of the stuff I've done for Decanter, reporting on tastings, is tweeted out the same day. So the editor's very keen to get my notes just so they can pick out my 5 top wines or something. So I could understand the utility of all that. But it's not something that I'm really into. And I also don't want to spend half my day staring at my mobile phone.
Yes. What would you say has impressed you the most about the Australian wine industry during your visit?
Quality. I mean, it's getting better all the time. Not only in Australia, I mean, it's true in many other places. But you don't see many poor wines. You really don't. Clumsy wines, unbalanced wines. There are some. But I was going earlier this week around regions in northern Victoria, which you might think of as sort of backwaters. But no, there's some absolutely stunning wines coming out of there. So no, I'm impressed more and more by the quality of what I'm finding. My main plea is that Australia hangs onto its great regional styles. It's Clare Riesling or Hunter Semillons, the fabulous Rutherglen 45s, Coonawarra Cabernet, which I think can be absolutely world class. So it'd be a shame if those styles either disappeared because of lack of demand, and I sometimes feel something like the Muscats are more appreciated abroad than they are in Australia. So I'd be very sad if everything became more standardised.
So what do you see as the biggest risks or challenges facing our industry, apart from perhaps that standardisation?
Well, again, I'm not an authority on this, but it seems that there's a lot of turmoil going on in the industry, and a lot of the companies like Foster's that got into the wine business now, getting rid of a lot of those properties and vineyards, and people who buy them, I don't know who they are. They're venture capitalists or whatever. Maybe they'll do a terrific job, but they're not really wine people. So I worry about, as I say, sort of standardization, the bottom line being the only thing that counts. Of course, it's a business. People have to make a profit. If they don't, they're going to go under. But the people I respect in the Australian wine business most are the ones with a passion who take you through their vineyards and say, look, we're doing this, we're doing that, this year we're going to try this. That's what makes it so exciting. That's what also drives the quality. So, I've forgotten what the original question was, but that was my overriding.
And may I ask, Stephen, do you know which trophy-winning wine you'll be reaching for first today at lunch?
Well, I reached for quite a few last night. It's a little hard to pick them out. After all, I only tasted a handful of the trophy wines, and I haven't memorized the complete list. I thought the Vas Felix Semillon was a stunning wine, so I love that. I like the older Riesling, the 05-year Buring's, a beautiful wine. Among the reds, there's Tom Costner's did a great job at Yabby Lake, so I was really pleased that came through. But as I say, my experience is fairly limited of the trophy wines. I look forward to tasting more of them soon.
Okay, great. Stephen Brook, thank you for talking to
My
Drink
pleasure.
Straight.